you have parasites. No matter who you are, where you live in the world, there's a very high likelihood you have a parasitic infection. And in fact, as many as 80% of people have one. Our guest in this week's episode breaks down why that's not necessarily a bad thing, the hidden blessing of parasites, if you will, the myriad different ways that we contract parasites, and the root causes of parasite overgrowths, which lead to infection, the dangers and harms of unaddressed parasite infections, the reasons why virtually no conventionally trained doctors or medical professionals even recognize parasitic infection as a real and prominent issue, the different types of parasites, each of the many potential causes and things that worsen parasitic infections and can set the stage for parasites to grow and reproduce uncontrollably. Some of the most effective universal tips, tools, and suggestions to address parasites. Hint, it's not always the anti-parasitic drugs and herbals that are often championed on TikTok and on social media. The incredible role and power of your nervous system to build resilience against infection, and conversely, why it's one of the first places to go if you're looking to implement a parasite protocol. Our guest this week is known as the Parasite Mama. Angela Stinson shares more of her backstory in the episode itself, but she is a holistic healthcare professional dedicated to teaching clients how to harness their innate healing abilities. She focuses on addressing health issues related to parasites and other root causes of disease, such as heavy metal toxicity, mold toxicity, stress-induced nervous system dysregulation, and a whole lot more. Angela's approach is to implement the core pillars and optimize those core pillars of holistic health. If you take away nothing else from the episode, I hope you realize just the power these classic pillars have in terms of not only mitigating parasites, but for their myriad health benefits. You can find the show notes and a link to everything we discuss, and even to work with Angela herself. If you want, you can get a free consultation and you can continue to work with her after that, or you can just consume some of her content, some of her courses, some of her Instagram posts, all at parasitemama.com, which will be in the show notes for this episode at mindbodypeak.com/149. I definitely learned a few things in this episode, and I hope that you do as well. Try to keep an open mind, and let's explore the unsexy world of parasites with Angela. Angela, welcome to Mind Body Peak Performance.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I've been looking forward to this conversation because it is going to be on a topic that I have not talked much about, but it keeps coming up in my daily life, in the things that I'm reading and the things that I hear on other podcasts. And because when things just keep resurfacing like that, I like to dig into them and to explore them further. So I thought you'd be the perfect person for this. But so far today, let's start off with the unusual non-negotiables you've done for your health, your performance, and your bioharmony.
Number one, I never even look at my phone or turn on any artificial lights until I have gone outside in the morning, seen the sunrise. I take my dogs out. I ground my bare feet in the grass every morning. And I just make sure that I take time to really get my circadian rhythm set. When I first started opening my practice, I was working like 7 days a week, and I was just burning the candle at both ends. And I really realized, hey, I need to practice what I preach. And so I really, especially this last year, have really focused on cutting down my hours and making sure I don't even work on Saturdays, Sundays, and Mondays. I really only work Tuesdays through Fridays, and I make sure that I'm really doing the things that I need for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to preach one thing, and it's a lot of times harder to actually follow through and do that ourselves. One thing that you mentioned that I want to dig into, and we'll be talking about a lot today, is your experience outdoors. And specifically, I've heard that being barefoot, depending on the surface you're walking into, can increase your susceptibility to parasites.
I know I get that a lot. Why are you putting your bare feet on the ground? So, one thing that I always tell people is parasites are everywhere. They are literally everywhere. We can inhale an egg and be exposed. So, living in fear, and there's a lot of fear based stuff out there right now, especially on TikTok about parasites. And it makes me crazy because we're meant to live in harmony. So we can't get away from them. And so the benefits far outweigh the risks. And really the goal, which we'll dig into more, obviously in this session, is make your body inhospitable so parasites cannot thrive when you get exposed, because we're going to get exposed quite often in our lives.
I completely agree with you. I don't know why it's controversial, but it is. If you ask most mainstream doctors, most conventional Western doctors, they will tell you that unless you've traveled to certain countries and you've gotten sick, say India, and you've gotten like dysentery or something, that there's no reason you should be at all concerned about parasites, let alone like actually test and do any protocols around them. And you're right, there's a huge component of like the terrain of our body and how healthy we are, increasing our or lack of health, increasing susceptibility. But how common are parasite infections, whether it's like the full clinical diagnosis or even just subclinical infections?
Parasitic infection, not everybody has a severe parasitic infection. When you're looking at, research from like the CDC and stuff like that, they'll say that about 50-60% of people have a parasitic infection. I find that it's much higher than that. Everybody on the planet has parasites. Again, we're meant to live in harmony with them. They actually do help our immune system. They go through the body and suck up other toxins. When they get overgrown, then you start running the risk of having major health issues because the parasitic infection is overgrown. But again, why is it overgrown? Um, we have to look at the other factors that are allowing the parasites to get overgrown in the first place. But I would say it's closer to about 80% of the population has a pretty severe parasitic infection.
So why is there that discrepancy? I knew this was coming when you first mentioned that it's not everyone, which is a stark contrast to what we'll hear when we go to the doctor's office, that almost no one in developed countries like the US have them. Why is there this big disparity between what you see in clinic and what doctors say to their patients?
So the big problem is the testing is very unreliable. So most of the time when you go into a doctor, they're going to do a stool test. And stool tests are less than 10% accurate because number one, most parasites aren't even going to be in the GI tract. They're going to be hiding in the organs of the body, the tissues of the body, and parasites can actually secrete an enzyme that self destructs their own body and their own DNA within 15 minutes of leaving the host body. So when you think about, hey, I'm going to give a stool test, you do the stool sample, you send it to the lab, and it sits there quite often for many days before it ever gets tested. And so that by that point, any parasites that were in there have already self destructed. And again, most of the time, unless it's like a full moon cycle where parasites are most active, and maybe you happen to catch some in the stool sample in the GI tract at that time. But again, testing is so unreliable, less than 10% accurate,
Wow.
unfortunately. And then I have heard from some friends that are in the medical field that even the way that they're training these days in the medical system is that when somebody comes into the office and starts talking about parasites, that they have a psychosis. I've had many clients that have actually been referred to going into a psych unit because they've gone to the doctor and said, hey, I really think I have a parasitic infection. So even the training around it is to automatically assume, oh boy, this person's crazy. And then you pair that with testing that's very unreliable. and it makes for kind of a mess, unfortunately.
I came across a stat that 11 out of 12 stool samples are wrong, like they're false negatives. And so you can see that this would be a big issue. How do those people who come in know that that's what they have? Like, why would they think that out of all things?
I mean, there are a lot of factors here. A lot of times, clients come to me when they've actually seen things pass. They've tried and experimented and done parasite cleansing. They're like, what is this coming out of me? My doctor thinks I'm crazy. And the same thing happened to me in my own healing journey when I went to my doctor and I'm like, I'm doing this cleanse, stuff's coming out. And he did stool testing and he's like, there's nothing, there's nothing. And I was like, well, then what are these? I actually brought what I was passing to him. And he's like, I don't know. He's like, you're eating healthy. Maybe it's an asparagus spine. And, you just kind of get treated like you're cuckoo. Um, and then people are starting to obviously, parasite cleansing is kind of like a big trend right now. And so people are starting to do more research and they're trying these cleanses or they're looking at like symptoms of parasites and they're like, oh my gosh, that's everything I'm experiencing. So it kind of takes them down that rabbit hole.
I want to explore that with you in 1 second. But before we do, there's probably some validity to that, though. A lot of times people see that they're passing things and it is indeed just food.
And it can. And that's one thing that I cover. I have a parasite group that's free, and people come in and they're like, hey, how do I know if this is a liver fluke or tomato skin? Because I did eat tomatoes. And I'm like, well, you're not really going to know unless you take in the liver fluke or the parasite itself and have it tested. And again, having it taken to your doctor, they're probably going to dismiss you as crazy. So, unless you're seeing an infectious disease specialist, a lot of people have actually gotten so desperate that they take it to the veterinarian and say, this came out of my dog. And then they get validated because the vet is like, oh, yeah, let's test this. That looks like a roundworm or, whatever. So, um, a lot of people don't have enough enzyme production or bioproduction going on. And so there's a lot of undigested food. So sometimes I tell people, you can send me pictures and I can help you identify, but sometimes I can't even figure out what that is that you passed. So
And other animals commonly have parasite infections, and that's not disputed. That's like understood and recognized and like a normal part of like treatment and pet health, but not for humans.
sadly. Now, the thing is, it was common. There are actually some of the earliest writings known to man talk about parasite cleansing. And it's something that was very common in those ancient cultures. And there are still some cultures that regularly do 2 to 4 cleanses during the year as maintenance. And unfortunately, in Western medicine, there's been a lot of propaganda that's been spread about, oh, this is misinformation or these people are crazy old wives, it's a wives' tale or whatever. But we are mammals, we are exposed to these things. And so regular cleansing, a couple times a year is an amazing tradition that we've sadly gotten away from.
It seems like there's two different types of parasite cleanses. There's the subtractive and then there's the additive. Like some people I've seen online actually introduce certain parasites for like controlled reasons to act therapeutically. What's your take on that? Do you ever see that working and being a good idea?
When it comes to my practice, it's not typically I'm not going to go and add parasites in for a client, but there are so many great experts. Dr. Klinghardt, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he talks a lot about, some people don't have enough parasites and there's got to be a perfect balance. There really does. And this is where I tell people like the yin and the yang of it is really important because some people are like, kill, 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 cleanse, cleanse, cleanse all the time. And they are stripping away so much good stuff that's you're just causing way more harm than good. But there are amazing studies where people actually ingest parasitic eggs. Some studies with autistic children where it goes in and those parasites go in and they start sucking up like all the heavy metals that child's been exposed to, or, and It's amazing. So there's got to be a perfect balance for sure.
How do you know where that perfect balance is? Because that seems like it's going to be a very elusive balance.
I know it's very bio individual. So first, when a client comes to me, obviously we're going to work on foundational things and drainage. If you can't poop, you can't sweat, all of those things, we're going to start there. And I am a huge, huge advocate of really regulating the nervous system because if you are super stressed, you're not going to pass anything. The body will not detox and let go of things that it doesn't need unless it feels safe and relaxed. So that's a big one for me that I'm always hammering home with my clients. Like, what do you need to do to regulate your nervous system? What needs to get out of your life, whether it's a toxic relationship, whatever it is, because that alone will allow parasites to thrive in the body. And then, as when we get into parasite cleansing, I generally start with we're going to cleanse during a full moon cycle for 3 to 12 months in a row. And again, it's very bio individual. Some people need fewer than 3 months and they're like, I feel amazing. And then we can cut back to cleansing 2 to 4 times a year during those full moon cycles as maintenance. But some people need a little longer than 12 months. So, really, the goal is we're going to cleanse every full moon cycle until you notice your health issues are going away. And once that happens, then you can cut back and do some maintenance cleansing 2 to 4 times a year.
I want to get more into the how to, the tutorial, the like theory behind it and how it all works. But before we go on to that, what are some of the common symptoms so people can start creating a checklist of like, okay, I experienced this, this, this. Maybe it's worth looking into. Perhaps I don't experience any of these, so I'll wait until later and like till I start experiencing some of these to actually look into it more.
So, really, every health issue known to man can be traced back to parasitic infection, which, yes, there's going to be overlap. So there can be like, hey, I'm having health issues because of heavy metal exposure or mold exposure or whatever. But ultimately, where we always start is going to be addressing parasites because they hold on to all the other crud. So I always start there first as far as like order of operations. But some of the common ones for parasitic, signs of parasitic overgrowth are going to be anal itching, teeth grinding, insomnia, night terrors, rashes, food intolerances, lots of digestive issues. Your dairy issues are a big one. Anytime there's a dairy issue, absolutely that's related to parasitic overgrowth.
Always.
Um, Cancer, yeah, every time, every time. I have so many clients that come to me with dairy issues, and obviously I like to focus on raw dairy, um, but if there's a dairy issue, then that tells me we've got to address parasitic infection. And we see those issues start to go away. The food intolerances disappearing as we work on it. But if you've been diagnosed with anything, whatever label the doctors have given you, whether it's cancer, fibromyalgia, lupus, MS, whatever it is, we need to go after parasites for sure.
Wow. Yeah, that's one of the things that got my attention about this field of study to begin with is that it seems that it can underlie just about anything and everything. And what's cool about what you said is that in terms of the order of operations, say you have a constellation of symptoms, you can't explain it, you don't know where it's coming from. The first place you can go to the very root would be to evaluate it as a potential parasite infection. And even if it's not, and you like work on these same things, then you're going to improve your health regardless. Because a lot of them are like general detoxification and healthy habits.
Exactly. And again, like I always tell people, there are multiple root causes, obviously, but when it all comes down to it, whatever the root cause is, let's say you're living in mold. Well, guess what? Mold exposure allows parasites to get overgrown because they're trying to suck up all the mold to protect you. Same thing if you've been exposed to heavy metals, they're going to get overgrown to protect you. Same thing if it's trauma that's not addressed or your nervous system is super dysregulated. Those lower vibrational emotions, again, they allow parasites to get overgrown in the body. So,
Tell me about the decision to rename at least on Instagram, because I know that you went from
Yes.
go ahead, go ahead.
Anti-parasitic mama. Yeah. So, gosh. So in my own journey, when I really, I mean, ever before I ever became a practitioner and specialized in this, I was a girl that was on death's doorstep. And so I was doing all this research. How can I heal myself naturally? Of course, I came across parasites and I did things all the wrong way. And so I was really aggressive. I didn't know about, order of operations and making sure my body was ready first and regulating my nervous system. So when I started kind of sharing my own journey, and then when I was in school to become a practitioner, everyone was like, "Oh, you're like the parasite queen. You're a parasite." And I was like, "Ooh, anti-parasitic mama." And that's what I went with for a couple years. And really last year, that really stopped resonating with me, especially the more research I was doing. I'm a giant nerd, so I'm always researching and what classes can I take? And let me see some different perspective here and read some different studies. And the more I realized that there's got to be a balance. I am not anti parasites. We've got to have them. We need them.
It's interesting you look at the word itself. Parasite means that it's damaging something for its own gain, and that's the way like we use it in pop culture. And to think that parasites that we view as always having these certain attributes might actually be benefiting us and protecting us from mycotoxins or from heavy metals. It's like such a radical departure from the mainstream view of them.
Yeah, especially like I mentioned before, the fear based stuff out there is really overwhelming right now. And a lot of people come to me or come into my group and they're like, I'm terrified. I'm going to die. Parasites are killing me. And I'm like, well, first of all, what you believe is going to happen. The cells in your body are listening. So change your mindset. There's got to be a balance and trust your body's healing process. And let's go after why they are getting overgrown. Now, obviously, parasitic infection is no joke. Like when they are overgrown, they are literally sucking the life out of you. And it's not good. They're defecating in you, they're reproducing, they're releasing ammonia, like all this crap. So you're going to feel horrible. So you want to address it. But on the other hand, I always tell people like, stop living in fear. Stop living in fear. It's not a demon attacking you, like a lot of people believe. There's just got to be a natural balance.
So if I was to come to you right now and say that, hey, I really think I have parasites, I want to be aggressive and get rid of them ASAP, how would you reframe that? Would you say like, let's make sure that you're detoxifying first and that you don't have heavy metal excess, or you're not in a mold and mycotoxin infested house? What would your approach be?
So, first, I would have you fill out my health questionnaire, which is really detailed. And I really ask people, like, I want to know about like what they've been exposed to, what's their job, have they been, think back all the way to childhood. Were you aggressively bitten one summer camp by a ton of mosquitoes and now you have Lyme disease and you don't know it? Have you had a ton of vaccinations and, you're full of heavy metals, or you've got your Wi-Fi on 24/7, and because even that exposure allows parasites to thrive. So I really dig deep. And then not everybody chooses to do testing through me, but most clients want to test, because that's the really good way for me to see what's going on in your body and stressing your body out the most. Because some people, there are no parasites stressing out the body. I'm going to do 1 to 3 months of working on foundationals. Let's clean up your diet. Let's clean up your life. Let's start getting outside, grounding, shutting off your Wi Fi, stop sleeping next to your phone, stop being glued to it, stuff like that. Let's get you sweating. Let's get you pooping regularly, all of those things. We're going to start there. And then, I mean, most of the time we see a huge change there. And even just those foundational things, people start passing parasites because the body starts to feel safer and more relaxed. And it's like, oh my gosh, I can release some of this that is no longer serving me, so to speak. And then once we do that stuff for 1 to 3 months, then we start working on regular parasite cleansing. And I often kind of combine stuff to address heavy metals as well, at the same time as parasite cleansing.
I also noticed that nervous system regulation has been something you've emphasized a number of times so far. So it sounds like that has a big importance for this.
It is huge. And, people will come to me and say, how can I get rid of all the parasites? Or how can I get rid of all the heavy metals? I'm going to do a heavy metal cleanse. And I'm like, you can't decide. You can't just be like, I'm going to do a heavy metal cleanse. And now I've gotten rid of all the heavy metals. Or if the body's not ready to dump that, it's not going to dump it. And the fastest way to allow the body to let go of that stuff is to regulate your nervous system. And we are so dysregulated today. Unfortunately, we're just bombarded with.
Yes. I'd also assume that like taking control of your breathing patterns and learning to nose breathe and to do some deliberate breath work practices, those are going to help pretty universally.
Huge. And I have an online free nervous system class where I talk about all the different things that you can do. Now, obviously, there are a ton of things that are going to dysregulate your nervous system, and toxic overload in the body is stressful to the nervous system. But there are a lot of things too that are out of my scope of practice. So, for example, trauma. I'm not going to sit with a client and address trauma, but I am going to encourage them, like, get into some sort of program where there's some sort of limbic brain retraining, and you're speaking with a professional that can help walk you through that. Because if you're constantly being triggered, again, those emotions are a lower vibration, and it does allow parasites and other pathogens to really thrive in the body. But even if you don't have trauma, there are other things that are dysregulating the nervous system. Mouth breathing, like you mentioned, huge. So I always talk about that. So really getting good breathing from the diaphragm, breathing through your nose, grounding, spending time in nature, listening to healing frequencies, disconnecting, doing a social media detox where you take certain days and you're like, I'm not even going to look at my phone. And trust me, when I did it, when I started doing it for me, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe how many times I just automatically was like wanting to look. I'm like, why am I so glued? Like, why do I have to look 200 times a day to see if I got a message? Like that, all the scrolling, artificial lights after sunset, stuff like that is really dysregulating for the nervous system. So just kind of putting some of those foundations in place.
So there's a big interplay between like all the healthy living things, like in training a strong circadian rhythm, minimizing bright blue light, especially at night, and then getting early morning sunlight, ideally grounded, ideally after you're also on a walk or something. So you're knocking out a bunch of these all at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. And I always like when I'm working with a client, we talk about, these things, and I make a game plan for them. And I always tell them, don't try to tackle all of this at once. Just pick one or two things a week to kind of focus on changing, because it can be overwhelming. But when you really master that nervous system work, it really starts to bring just everything back into balance for sure.
I know that a lot of this is extremely bio individual. It varies tremendously from one person to the next based on life circumstances, genetics, epigenetics, and so on. But in working with all those clients, have you found any universal things aside from like breath work and I guess just aside from like the general concept of nervous system regulation that tends to help across the board as like little things that we can add to our routine or even subtract from our routines?
So definitely building up stomach acid is a huge, huge importance. And most people do not have enough stomach acid. And so that's something foundational that I work on with every single client. Let's help your body make more bile. Let's help your body make more digestive enzymes. Let's help your body make more stomach acid. A lot of people are diagnosed with like GERD or, and they get put on these, acid blockers. And it's usually the complete opposite. They don't have enough. And that is your very first line of defense against parasites or any other pathogen, viral, bacterial, whatever, because when you're exposed, we should have a nice, strong stomach acid that burns that stuff up upon contact, but most of us don't. And so that's a foundational thing that works across the board for people. And then homeopathy is another thing I use a lot, especially when I do testing. I like to test and see, um, what does that client's body want? Because some people are like, boom, they're ready to go strong, go to straight to strong herbs, and other people they need something much gentler. And so homeopathy really helps with that as well. But stomach acid for sure, that's a really, really big one too.
A lot of these bodily fluids have like incredibly beneficial and powerful antimicrobial properties like stomach acid and bile and even enzymes. If you're not digesting your food, then you can run into other complications.
Yeah, and enzymes are crucial for breaking down parasites as well.
Oh,
So
really?
if you're not producing enough, yeah, huge, huge. Even when I have a like before we when we're just working on foundationals, before we ever get into major cleansing, I'll get clients on, let's increase your stomach acid, let's introduce an enzyme. And boy, they start passing parasites without even using strong herbs because it is so important. When the body is like, "Oh my gosh, I'm finally getting what I need," like, it can start to just naturally release that stuff and break it down.
And are these digestive enzymes or more along like the proteolytic and systemic enzymes?
I usually do a mix of both. Typically, I start with digestive enzymes first, especially like when I do testing, I'm looking at, is their body producing enough stomach acid? Is their body producing enough enzymes? And it will show me when I do testing what they're deficient in. And so I try to tailor it to that, like, oh, you're not producing enough pancreatin or amylase or whatever. And we'll kind of go after that stuff first. But yeah, it's any kind of enzyme is going to help when it comes to parasitic overgrowth for sure, or any kind of pathogenic overgrowth, candida, whatever it is.
What's your testing protocol? Because you've mentioned the issues around stool testing, and I have a feeling you have a better version. You mentioned the qualitative assessment, and that's huge and very overlooked in general when it comes to health. And I find that the best practitioners tend to have pretty thorough and comprehensive questionnaires and assessments that people answer. But what does your process look like?
Once someone does the questionnaire, if they decide to do testing, and I can tell you after working with hundreds and hundreds of clients at this point and in my own journey, I did every test you could imagine, trying to find out what's wrong with me. Um, and now my favorite type of testing is bioenergetic because everything has an energetic frequency, everything, including deficiencies, parasites, heavy metals. And so I really want to look at, again, what is stressing that client's body out the most. And so it's a saliva sample and either a teaspoon of hair from anywhere on the body or a teaspoon of nail clippings. So I have a machine test that, and then it's going to show me is going on as far as stress with hormones, nutritional deficiencies, vitamins, minerals, amino acids, enzymes, stomach acid. Um, and then it's going to look at anything stressing the body out toxin wise. So, parasites, viruses, bacteria, heavy metals, chemicals, fungus, mold, mycotoxins, all of that. And again, there are so many tests out there, but again, they're not as accurate. So, GI mapping, for example, or a urine mycotoxin test. That stuff's not always going to be in the GI tract or coming out in the urine. Your body's probably holding on to it in the tissues and the organs. And so when I do bioenergetic, it's really looking at those frequencies of what's stressing out the body the most. And then I test against about 5 to 600 different remedies. And I want to get 5 or 6 that are customized for that specific client. So I do not believe in blanket protocols. I cringe when I see people say, buy this. Most of my clients come to me after they have already spent thousands of dollars. And they're like, I've been on this protocol and it's $500 a month and I've been doing it for a year and a half. And your body may not want that. So I don't want my clients on a billion supplements. Let's just get 5 or 6 things that are uniquely suited for your body, that are resonating with you. and let's work on taking those for a few months because that's what your body wants at this stage right now to start kind of balancing out. So I try to really do a customized approach, and I don't want my clients again spending a ton of money. I was a broke single mom on disability when I was trying to figure out how to heal my body. And so I really try to carry over, yes, we want high quality stuff, but where can we get a discount? Let's find stuff that's not super pricey. It should not cost a fortune to heal your body. It just shouldn't.
Yeah. I've been digging into each of the different forms of testing over the last couple of years. And the more I look into them, the less convinced I am of their actual like diagnostic capacity and their accuracy and specificity and all that, because you might not be looking at the right part of the body to get this, or the test itself might fluctuate incredibly from day to day or even hour to hour. And then also, it depends on the lab you send it into. Like, you can send the same exact sample into two different labs, you can get like 20% margin of error or higher. And it's like, well, how can you base entire health decisions on these types of things? And I've come across bioenergetics in this capacity again recently multiple times, and it's an area that's very fascinating to me, but I haven't done much digging into it. How does it like compare? Like, are you seeing like a high correlation between like the actual like true positive diagnoses that people get from their doctor when they're actually right and they detect the parasite versus the bioenergetic system?
Totally different. So, for example, I just had a new client come to me recently and he had blood work, stool testing. He did a urine test for mold, like he did a GI map. And he was like, everything's normal. Everything looks pretty good. I had a little bit of like, candida overgrowth or whatever. But then when we do the bioenergetic testing, and I'm like, you have like three different types of toxic mold causing stress to your body. And he's like, but the urine test said I didn't. And I'm like, well, it's not going to come out in the urine if your body's holding on to it. Your body is holding on to it. It's in your tissues, it's in your organs. It's not coming out in your pee. So I just find that it's so on point. It's really been instrumental in really helping my clients feel validated, especially when they've done all the testing and they're just told it's all in your head. So to really get those, to see it on paper and go, oh my gosh, the bacteria that causes Lyme disease is resonating in my body and my body is stressed by it and wants to work on it right now. When they're like, my blood work said I didn't have Lyme disease. My doctor thinks I'm crazy. Or my tool stool test said there were no parasites. And guess what? We have two or three types of parasites causing stress that the body is ready to work on and wants to address. So again, it's going to look at all factors. It's going to test you for all parasites, but not all parasites in your body are stressing out your body. So there might be only two or three types that are like, hey, this is overgrown. My body is like saying, help, I need you to work on this right now.
And when you're working with clients as often as you are, it doesn't necessarily matter what the gold standard research is currently saying. You care about the things that actually work. And if the lab testing that is supposed to be the best isn't getting anyone good results consistently, yet this other thing over here that might not be as well researched, but it seems to correlate very highly with the client's real world experience and the real world outcomes, to me, that seems a lot more important.
The research on bioenergetic testing, there's more that's starting to come around, but it has been a lot of times dismissed as woo woo or out there. I know for me, like I grew up in a Christian household, so anything having to do with like energy medicine was like witchcraft or weird, um, so when you're new to it, it can kind of be like, this is weird. But again, a lot of things are energy medicine and they're used now. EKGs, MRIs, ultrasounds, that kind of stuff. So I think that as years go on, and more studies and stuff come out, that I think that more people will get on board. But it's definitely fascinating.
The actual results that you get from a readout, it's not just going to tell you the one area that's in most need of support. Like, for example, if I had a bad night of sleep and then I did the test, I wouldn't want it to tell me that my cortisol is a little higher or that my lymphatic drainage isn't quite what it should be. I'd want to know more of like the longer term trends and things I need to address. So when you're getting a readout, does it actually break down multiple things, or is it just the one thing that's the most in need of help?
No, it's so cool. So it's gonna look at every body system, and it shows you like this color coded printout. So ideally we want everything in blue, but it's going to tell us like, hey, your heart is only functioning at 60%, or your endocrine system is at 22% right now. It's going to look at every system, every single system of the body. And so it'll give you a readout of that. And then it's going to go even further and lay out which parts of those systems are really, really stressed. So, for example, the endocrine system, that can be pituitary gland, thyroid, adrenals. There are so many factors. So, it's going to tell me, hey, my endocrine system is really stressed, only functioning at 30%. And then under that, it's going to tell me, out of those endocrine systems, your thyroid is really stressed, or your pituitary gland. And so then I can really customize, like, all right, what do we need to do for thyroid work? What do we need to do to support your pituitary gland? Now, when it comes to the customized remedies that are recommended as well, that's usually going to also all encompass. So I'm not like, hey, we're going to take these remedies and then 20 more, like I try to really just, keep it a small amount at target certain things at a time, whatever's most stressed. So it's really fascinating. And then it goes into, of course, any kind of sensitivities, food sensitivities, environmental sensitivities. Are you sensitive to EMFs? Are you sensitive to certain foods right now that we maybe need to kind of just stay away from for now for a little bit? And then, of course, it breaks down into amino acid deficiencies, vitamins, minerals, stomach acid, digestive enzymes, all of that. And then hormone systems too. So it'll say like low melatonin, or, you know, all of that. So it really is going to give you a really complete picture. You get so much bang for your buck, which is I'm a huge fan of too, because some of the testing methods out there are so pricey. And when a client comes to me, they're like, that's all it costs for that? And I'm like, I know, I love it. So you get so much information from it. So yeah, I'm a huge fan, obviously.
I'm excited. I'm gonna have to look more into this. I have a feeling the machines themselves, based on the complexity of them and the diagnostic readouts you get, are quite expensive.
Yes. So like the Quest 4 machine that we're basically using for testing is very pricey, into the tens of thousands of dollars. But
Back on the topic of parasites, I guess we should cover more about the background. Like, what different types of parasites are there that are common? And then also, what is the issue with just not addressing them? Why can't I just put my head in the sand and pretend like they don't exist?
exactly. So there are definitely a lot of different types of parasites. So we've got the big ones that can be seen with the naked eye. Um, And really, when it comes to, again, the big parasites, I always tell people, when you're doing a cleanse, some people get really frustrated if they're like, I can't see anything coming out. Well, over 60% of parasites are microscopic. So you're not going to see them at all, even if you're like hardcore cleansing. But the big parasites as well, they're often mixed into the stool. So unless you're digging around in there and trying to like pull stuff out, you're often not going to see them either. And they often come out broken apart into smaller pieces. But yeah, as far as types of parasites, so we have helminths, and the helminths are the ones that are big enough to see with the naked eye. So those are going to be like liver flukes, tapeworms, roundworms, pinworms. Um, and then we have protozoa. And protozoa are the single celled parasites that are invisible to the naked eye. And so, again, not going to see those at all. And then we also have arthropods. And so those are kind of parasitic creatures that are in a parasite category, but those are going to be like mites, fleas, ticks, things that can actually like invade the body, or um, give things to you, so to speak, mosquitoes, stuff like that.
Okay, and those are the main ones. There are not that many different categories, classes.
No, there really aren't. There really aren't. They kind of all fall into, 3 different categories, basically.
Why can't I just ignore all this, pretend like it doesn't exist, make it all go away? Because there's already enough things to focus on when it comes to health and wellness.
Really, why you don't wanna ignore it is, again, parasites are constantly reproducing, and they're also gonna reproduce more if your toxic load is really high. So, if again, if you've been exposed to chemicals, heavy metals, plastics. Hello, they're everywhere. We have microplastics in our blood now. They're going to get overgrown to protect you. And so, as they get more and more overgrown, they really invade. And they're really going to go to any area of the body that has had damage or trauma, or any of the area of the body that is holding on to chemicals or heavy metals. So, um, they invade the liver. They really burrow into the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas. Um, for example, there are some studies that talk about vaccinations and things that go into the brain. Then you're going to get brain parasites because they're going to go in there to try to suck that up. And it's the same way with an injury. If you've had, for example, they'll go anywhere in the body that's weak. So if you've had a traumatic brain injury or concussion, because that part is damaged, they really like damaged areas of the body. And so I always talk to my clients too about the emotional aspect of things, like really how certain emotions affect different organs of the body. And so for example, if there's a lot of anger, frustration, unforgiveness, that's going to affect liver, gallbladder. And so those organs are now weakened because of those lower vibrational emotions, and parasites will automatically congregate to those areas. And it's the same thing with lungs. If you're experiencing lots of grief that affects the lungs, like then you can have more lung issues or flukes that travel to the lungs. So there's so much to consider. And yeah, you definitely don't want to ignore it. You want to do something about it so that you're cleansing just enough that there's like a good balance.
So they will preferentially target the weakest link, an area of an injury or some kind of other damage. And by them targeting that organ or system in the body and them burrowing into that organ and reproducing, that's going to be causing further issues. And that's in their attempt to help like mop up some of the damage, but it's still going to be having a even more detrimental effect on you because of like the way they work. So in
They,
that case, you
obviously
wouldn't
can
want to
cause
necessarily just remove the
movement.
parasites. You'd want to address whatever it was that was below the parasites, the issue.
Exactly. That's always what I say. Like, stop trying to only focus on kill, kill, kill the parasites because they're going to keep coming back if you don't address the other stuff. If you're not addressing your trauma or your dysregulated nervous system, or you're not addressing your toxic load and you're just eating processed food and like having plastic exposure all the time and heavy metals and whatever, um, they're going to keep growing. They're going to keep coming back, and it's going to be a never ending battle.
So the way I'm seeing it now is like kind of like the way a fever works in the body to help make the body and mind less hospitable to pathogens. I see that the parasites can be doing something similar, but if you let a fever run out of control and say it goes to 105, 105 degrees Fahrenheit, you can go into a coma and die. So you wouldn't necessarily want to let it run its full course if it's taking you that hot, but you wouldn't want to suppress the fever if it's at like 100-degree fever. Like at that point, you're going to be counterproductive to the body and getting over it. So is it similar with parasites that like if you have an issue, you want to address the issue and the parasites will naturally come back into balance, into harmony with the body. But if it's getting too extreme, then you'd want to do one of these cleanses.
Exactly.
Well, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the actual protocol to address them if they get too far out of balance, because I'm sure when people see the title of this episode, they're going to be expecting this to be the bulk of the conversation, even though it hasn't been. But what is the protocol? You mentioned earlier, depending on your current state of health and how many of these you've done, that it can be a year-long process, or in some cases, it can be much shorter. And you also mentioned doing them a couple times per year, ideally. But if it's a year long process or even a 4-month process, you can't really do it a couple times a year. And also, live because that will be your entire time.
So let's say I have a client come to me and they have like tons of health issues. Um, then they're probably going to need to cleanse a little bit longer, but we don't cleanse every single day. So I'm only going to have a client cleanse during the full moon cycles. And it's about 11 days out of each month that parasites are most active. It's 5 days before a full moon and 5 days after that parasites are the most active, and they're coming out of hiding, out of the internal organs, out of the tissues, and they're coming into the GI tract to feed, reproduce. And so they are most vulnerable to be killed during that time. And so when I have a client do a cleanse, that's when we're doing it. And not everyone can tolerate a full 11 days of cleansing. So typically, I'm going to start with like 3 days out of that full moon cycle. As far as protocols, it's going to be different for every client. So part of it is going to depend on what does it say when they're testing? Did the remedies that pop up for them, are they going like, yep, let's go after parasites right now. I'm ready. And again, I want to know, is that client pooping? Are they, sweating easily? All that stuff. But a lot of times, again, the body's not ready for that. And so remedies are going to say, we're going to calm your nervous system. This is for, kind of nervous system stuff, balancing hormones, replenishing electrolytes, all that kind of stuff first. But as far as protocols, typically, I'm going to start with homeopathic remedies to address parasites first because they are very gentle yet very effective, especially if, like, obviously, we don't want pregnant or breastfeeding women doing aggressive cleansing, but they can do homeopathic safely. And so, yeah, so we don't want, pregnant women or breastfeeding women or anybody that's in major adrenal fatigue and their body is so stressed out. You don't want to go into hardcore cleansing. We've got to calm the body down first. And so typically I start with homeopathics. If they can tolerate those, then we'll graduate to like very low dosage herbals. And parasites adapt and they become immune to things very, very quickly. So you don't want to use the same thing over and over and over. So I'm a huge fan of have a couple different herbal things on hand that you can switch out during those full moon cycles to keep the parasites guessing, so to speak. Um, and obviously, we have to have a good binder on hand. I prefer binders that do not contain charcoal because charcoal can be very constipating for a lot of people. And when you use charcoal for more than 3 days in a row, can really actually start to contribute to some pretty severe nutritional deficiencies. So it's great in an acute situation, but I much prefer, other binders. Pectin, if I have a client, that is more sensitive, or chlorella, zeolite, different things like that for binders. Some clients do really well on bentonite clay. Some it's constipating. Um, so again, I really want to know from client to client, if they have a tendency toward constipation, then we go for things that are less constipating. Um, Again, as far as protocols, I don't have like, hey, here's my one protocol. I try to really customize it from client to client.
It seems to me like there's two classes here of like the therapeutic agents. It's the stuff that's like building general health, whether it's like improving glutathione status, it's taking the enzymes, it's helping your bile with TUDCA or something like that. And then there's other things that are the more like therapeutic agents that are like aggressive and target parasites specifically. And it seems like it would be a good idea to build your body up and to provide it with all the raw materials it needs, and then to be a little more discerning. I mean, you should be discerning with both, but even more so when it comes to the anti-parasitic agents.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly. And I always tell clients, like, it doesn't matter if you're a pro cleanser and you've been doing this a long time, the foundationals should always be the most important. Like, you're doing the glutathione levels up with organic coffee enemas, or you're, using castor oil packs, or you're building up your stomach acid and your enzymes and all of those things. You're sweating, you're inducing a sweat. Liver, kidney support, stuff like that is so important always, always. And again, nervous system, I'll preach that till I'm blue in the face, but that stuff is so, so important always. And when you start doing a cleanse, and you're using stronger herbs and you start to feel like, whoa, I am not feeling well, again, back off on your dosage and focus more on those foundationals. Induce your sweat, do the hot bath with magnesium flakes or whatever it is you're going to do, um, to really keep those drainage pathways opened.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about a number of things you just mentioned, such as your take on the importance of minerals and remineralization for like helping with parasites, and then also castor oil packs and coffee enemas, because those come up all the time. And I've actually gotten questions about each of those.
So, mineral balancing is one of those foundational things that I work on with clients before we ever start cleansing as well. So, not only we're going to make sure, hey, we're going to work on enzymes and stomach acid and nervous system, but I always go for like definitely a foundational thing is mineral balancing, because obviously parasitic overgrowth is going to steal your body of nutrients, and minerals are like the spark plug for every system in your body to work correctly. And so it's really important for hormone balance. Mineral balancing naturally chelates heavy metals from the body in a gentle way without chelation therapy, which I'm not a fan of. So it's so important. So yeah, and so with a client again, we're going to work on those foundational things. And if they can't easily go to the bathroom or they have a lot of digestive issues, I don't start them straight into coffee enemas. We start with castor oil packs first. And as they build up a tolerance, and everyone's different, even with the castor oil pack, I never say, wear it right away all night long. I'm going to typically start with 30 minutes a day or an hour a day and slowly increase, because a lot of clients that come to me have major health issues and they're very, very sensitive. So I'm always a fan of, let's not stress your body out more. Your body's already stressed with all this toxic load. So let's introduce things gently, safely, and just build up a tolerance. And same thing with organic coffee enemas. I typically start with like a filtered warm water enema, or an organic chamomile tea enema. And if they tolerate that, then we can kind of graduate from there. But yeah, those things are amazing for really helping to open drainage pathways for sure.
They seem to have so many different, like, broad and beneficial effects that it makes sense outside of parasites also.
Yes, exactly. And it's one of those things that is going to naturally help your body to get to a place where it just automatically starts releasing bad stuff without even having to use really, really strong herbs. Or a lot of people are like, on the ivermectin train or fenbendazole or, whatever. And that should never be the first place you start. um, it can be like step 7, 8, 9, or 10 down the road after you've already implemented, all the other things and can tolerate it.
Even some of the, like, greenwashing solutions, like taking like a natural herbal, shouldn't be the first solution, as you've made quite clear in this interview. That can come, but first you got to address the other stuff. You want the best, longest lasting, and most beneficial outcomes.
Because what happens, and again, I did this too before I knew what I was doing. Um, I dove straight into, I'm going to take prescription antiparasitics. I'm going to take ivermectin. I'm going to do strong herbs and just kill these suckers until they're all gone. Well, number one, you don't want them all gone. But number two, those things, I think that they can have their place, but it's very bio individual. So not everyone can tolerate it, and definitely not a starting point, because those things are very hard on the body, especially the liver. And for me, when I took them, my body went into such a state of shock. I actually lost my hair and had to shave my head. And that was horrible, very traumatic parasite cleansing experience for me. So I always tell people, learn from my mistakes. Don't do it so aggressively. Don't do that stuff first. Um, And I've had clients that come to me after they've tried some of those stronger things and end up in the hospital with elevated liver enzymes. Or if you're very, very aggressive before your drainage pathways are open and those foundational things are in place, what happens is the parasites can scatter and burrow even deeper into the body and start forming cysts and tumors because they will try to survive. They don't want to die. And so if your body's not prepped and ready, it's a recipe for disaster for sure. And I don't want to try to create a scare tactic because again, those things can have their place if your body's prepared. But I see a lot of, in parasite groups or again, TikTok where just take this ivermectin at this really strong dose or take ivermectin and albendazole and fenben and menbend, and it's just like, "Oh my gosh," like, I'm terrified for these people to really do that, and I know some people do, and then they end up finding me and they're like, "I took all that and ended up in the hospital," or, like, it was yeah, it's not a good thing, so definitely just, low, slow, and gentle is always the way to go.
Yeah, that message has become very clear, and I'm in agreement with you. We've been going for a while, so we're gonna start to wind this one down. But if people want to connect with you, to see some of your posts on Instagram, or to visit you on your website, what's the best way for them to reach you?
So if they go to my website, parasitemama.com, that's going to be like the best place because I've got like, you can click and see my Instagram, my Facebook. I've got my free Parasite Facebook group on there. They can send me an email. I've got my phone number and email on there if they want to do a free consult or something. I always do a 20-minute free consult, and there's never obligation attached to that at all. It's how I give back as a practitioner and help people figure out, am I ready for a cleanse? What might be best for me? Again, based on that really long health questionnaire that I have them fill out first.
Well, Angela, I have a couple more questions for you before we do. If there was a worldwide burning of the books and all knowledge on earth was lost, but you get to save the works of three teachers, who would you choose and why?
I'm going to say this is one of my favorites, the emotion code. It talks about how to help yourself release those hidden emotions and traumas that are stuck in the body and cause health issues. So, this is a huge, huge one of those foundational things I think is super important. And then Hulda Clark, The Cure for All Diseases. Hulda Clark is one of the pioneers when it comes to parasites. And she goes into like where they go in the body, different labels that people give for diseases and which parasites really cause those. So her book is amazing. Oh my gosh. It's really hard for me to pick, but my husband and I are, big time into learning to homestead. And so I love this one, farming on 1/4 of an acre so that people can grow their own food if they need to.
Yeah, I'm familiar with all those, and I have actually all of them on my reading list. So, all right, I'm going to say something, and you'll repeat what I say back and then answer the question, kind of like a repeat after me. The biggest myth around parasites is.
The biggest myth around parasites, I would say, in this day and age is that they are out to kill you and you need to just kill, kill, kill all the time in order to prevent them from killing you.
The best approach to addressing parasite overgrowth is.
The best approach to addressing parasitic overgrowth is regulate your nervous system and figure out what is allowing them to thrive in the first place, whether that's plastics, mold exposure, heavy metals, lower vibrational emotions from trauma, or whatever.
Something I'm currently researching or am interested in is.
So, something I'm currently researching and interested in, the procedure of actually having people ingest parasites for benefits, for health benefits. That's one of the big ones that I've been looking into.
You don't need to repeat these ones anymore, but what is one thing that your tribe does not know about you?
So, one thing most people they don't know is that my husband and I recently purchased a 40-acre plot, and we are planning on homesteading. So, um, it's always been a dream of mine to eventually have a healing retreat, and so it's happening.
I'm excited for you as well. Well, Angela, how would you like to bring this one home today? Any actionable takeaways you have for people listening in who have made it this far?
Well, first of all, you know your body better than any doctor out there. So, um, listen to your body, listen to your gut instincts. Don't give up on what you're researching, whatever rabbit holes you're looking into, because we're all bio individual. And if you keep seeking, you're going to find what works for you.
Well, that's the perfect way to wrap this one up. Angela, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I learned a lot more than I expected about parasites, and I have a new beneficial view of them. And I'm looking forward to staying in touch and talking to you again down the line.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine. Take care. I hope that this has been helpful for you. If you enjoyed it, subscribe and hit the thumbs up. I love knowing who's in the 1% committed to reaching their full potential. Comment 1% below so that I know who you are. For all the resources and links, meet me on my website at mindbodypeak.com. I appreciate you and look forward to connecting with you. As a reminder, the information depicted in this video is for information purposes only. Please consult your primary healthcare professional before making any lifestyle changes.